Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and with the new Garfield movie recently released, now's as good a time as any to make the vastly superior Gorefield.
I require lasagna, John.
Of course, the real beauty of Gorefield lies in his limitless possibilities. There's a seemingly endless number of designs and motifs, and the only limiting factor is your imagination. Your sick, twisted, horrifying imagination. Personally, my imagination comes in the form of multiple voices telling me to start random fires, but this week they told me to make a big clay-covered aluminium mouth and see where that takes us. I'll add some big side lips to my cavernous moth, and once I've squished it into an even skinnier shape, I'll start refining the inside by rolling my ball stylus back and forth to create some more natural, fleshy-looking interior textures. A few strategically placed wormy dealies inside the mouth will add an extra layer of interior texture, then once those have been blended in, I'll work my way through a series of progressively smaller ball styluses, creating progressively smaller textures until I'm finally ready to start adding the teeth. I made my teeth off camera by rolling little balls into pointed tooth-shaped teeth and baking them so I can press them into the soft, supple clay of the mouth, working my way from big teeth to small teeth until I haven't got any room left. At that point, I can start thickening up the rest of the body, which I'll do by slapping some thicker clay sausages around the body before blending them downwards to create a copious amount of flabby fat folds. Garfield is renowned for his love of lasagna, and one recurring theme in the Gorefield lore is that his true shape reflects his gluttony and is more often than not a voluminous, fleshy, lasagna-craving monstrosity. So I guess that's kinda what I'm going for his body. As far as making his legs, I couldn't decide on what I wanted to do, but I feel like I've made a lot of skinny legs lately, so this time I'm just gonna go with like a whole lot of tentacles. Not big ones or particularly detailed ones, just like a whole bunch of them. So once I've stuck lots of little limbs protruding from his lower half, I'll pinch and pull and twist them into shape until it looks like his noodly limbs are clambering all over the place in a lasagna-inspired fervor. Now, before I bake this Lovecraftian horror for the first time, I thought that the mouth was missing a little something, so I'll smoosh a big ball of clay into a tapered noodle that I'll then flatten out and draw a line down the center. Then, using some clay shapers and a well-loved toothbrush, I'll texture my tapered clay noodle until it looks like an extra large tongue, at which point I can fit it into place in Gorefield's torso mouth. With that, I'll bake the body to save my progress. Now, one thing that I've noted is that I've made this torso far too tall for what I plan to do with Gorefield, so I need a way to make his upper half removable. So enter this water-based separator. This stuff creates a barrier between baked and unbaked clay, which will allow me to make my upper half without worrying about the two parts sticking together. Before I make the whole upper body though, I'm going to make a skinnier central portion that I can then bake in place on the lower portion. This way I can perfectly fit it on the bottom half but still be able to bake it in the oven. And because I added the separator, this top portion should slip right off.
Wow.
I'll then drill a couple holes in the front of the upper blob so I can fit a looped length of armature wire in that then gets wrapped in some aluminium foil. This, of course, will be Garfield's long neck, so I'll wrap it in a thin layer of clay before beginning to sketch out the face. I'm not entirely sure how the face is going to fit, so before I commit to refining him in the detail, I'm going to make a rough sketch to make sure I'm happy with the proportions and the style. More often than not, I just go straight into a sculpture without any sort of pre-check work, but given how little of this sculpture up to this point is Garfield-esque, I really need to make sure that the face fits the original design, so probably taking a little bit of extra time now is going to pay off in the future. At this point though, I'm pretty happy with how it's looking, so I can pop those temporary eyeballs out and replace them with some more permanent pre-baked ones before smoothing all the various bits out and refining the shape. He's a bit wide-eyed, so I'll cover the majority of the eye in some oversized eyelids before giving the whole thing a proper smoothing to clean it up. I'll also squish a little wormy dealy into his mouth and curve it around into the back, then using some sculpting tools I can poke some teeth into it to create a perfectly friendly little bottom jaw smile. Otherwise, with the face looking recognizable enough, I can get to work on the rest of the upper torso, starting by wrinkling the neck to make it nice and flabby like the rest of the body, as well as doing the same for his shoulders before sticking a set of 4 long aluminium arms into his upper torso. I can then bend these into the correct position, going with a sort of chosen disciple of the lasagna gods pose before wrapping them in a thin layer of wire so my subsequent thin layers of clay can have something to hold on to. I'm not going to bother with too much detail on the arms like muscle or tendons since I kinda want them to be gangly and thin, and I'm still not sure what I'm going to do for the surface texture. If I cover them in fur, then all that detail is going to get lost anyways, and if I go in a different route, then I'll have to worry about that when I get to it. Otherwise, with 4 smooth, featureless limbs in place, it's time to make some hands. I'll start as I always do with a little ball that gets smooshed into a flat oval into which I can cut some fingers. Some strategic pinching and pulling will make those fingers noodly and long, and I can attach a fat thumb and thicken up the palm. Otherwise, a little refinement, and I've got a terrific little hand ready to be popped in place. Then repeat these steps thrice more to make the other hands, and I can use my silicone-tipped tweezers to reposition my fingers to really sell that whole "bring your Lord and Savior the lasagna he requires" pose. With that one final bake, we'll lock everything in place, and he's looking pretty darn good. However, he is looking a bit too clean. To fix this, I'm going to add a combination of stippled on liquid clay and lots of little balls scattered around his body. The little balls will act as the ever-important plague-riddled pustules all Gorefields seem to require, and the stippled-on clay will act as the much-needed extra-gnarly surface texture. Otherwise, one final bake in the oven will lock everything in place, and a thick dab of hot glue will let me attach my 2 Gorefield halves together, leaving me with a lovely grayscale kitty in need of some color. Now, the white kitty base coat isn't just for fun, since it'll make the upcoming coats of pinks and oranges a hell of a lot less obnoxious to apply. I'll paint the inside of the belly, mouth, and the tongue with a dark pink bordering on purple, then follow that up with a lighter pink to add a bit of color variation to the tongue and the most visible parts of the mouth. Finally, to tie it all together, I'll give all the goopy mouth bits a red wash that should seep into all the recesses and textures. As for the rest of Gorefield, I'll give absolutely everything else a heavy coat of orange. Once he's completely covered in orange, I'll come back with a yellow to dull down the orange vibrancy and bring him one step closer to a Garfield accurate palette. I'll then follow that up with a heavy sponging of a lighter orangey yellow. The sponge will ensure that the lighter color stays out of the skin folds and recesses, creating some nice color variation and shading. I can then follow that up with a final light yellow to add some final highlights. To make the pussy pustules stand out a bit more and make them look a little bit more infected, I'll dab some dark terracotta around each of the surrounding areas, then follow that up with a lighter pink, mostly focused on the pustules themselves. I'll then move that pink down to the tongue where I can dab away to bring out that scratchy texture, then I can do the same thing to the mouth to highlight all those gnarly fleshy textures inside before moving on to painting each of my teeth with a basic white base coat. While that's drying, I'll move up to Gorefield's face and paint his teeth white, which will stand out nicely against the black that I already painted inside. I'll then paint his eyes white, then rim them in red and clean them up with that original white. I was going to add some pupils, but decided I kinda liked the blank white look, so I opted to leave them out in the end. Otherwise, while I'm up here, I'll paint his nose pink before moving back to the teeth to add some sepia wash, followed by a white on just the tips. Finally, the last thing to do then is add his black fur markings, which I really didn't know how to do. I first tried to make them using a small scratchy brush, then moved on to a slightly larger dry brush before wondering if a large thick-haired brush would give me the best results. This was definitely a mistake, so I just went back to a small brush flicking back and forth, which looks fine. Fortunately, it only took 2/3 of the markings to figure out what didn't look wonky, and black on orange is barely noticeable. I guess one saving grace is that it's on the back side, and until I spin the model around, you'll have no idea. A little touch-up work will get my poorly painted pustules looking infected again, and I can move on to the final step, which is making the mouth extra goopy with an initial heavy coating of gloss varnish, followed by a stringy application of fabric glue. This particular brand of fabric glue is almost identical to Oohoo, which I've used in previous videos, but it costs roughly 3 times as much, which of course means this model is extra fancy. Otherwise, once the mouth is looking adequately goopy, that's us done here, and onto the glamour shots.
John, I require lasagna, John.
As always, a big ol' thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are ya to the newest of them. Tatsuki, Kristen B, The Wonder Cat, Kevin Bobo Snyder, Henry and Grant Noel, Monster Jam, Army Battle, Hales, Scarlet Polis, Calcath80, Gray J, Luna Jupiter, Tiny Haley, Kyle Lynch, Cat Mallow, A Curious Goblin, Dark Wolfin XD, and Roland Hanks. You are the freshly baked lasagna that gets me through every Monday. If you made it this far, then let me know in the comments down below if you actually saw the Garfield movie and how it compares to the cinematic masterpiece that was the 2004 Bill Murray version. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.